The View's Whoopi Goldberg is coming after the media for the way they are covering the ongoing pro-Palestine student protests. Maybe I should say we. I'm part of the media. Let's take a listen.
Part of our problem is the media takes what is the best clickbait. So you see the same posters or you see the same people, but you don't see the folks who are doing peaceful stuff and saying, here's what we want to do. I would caution the media to be very careful about what they're doing and how they're handling that.
Goldberg goes on to say that the media is trying to push a narrative that the protesters disagree with. Goldberg, of course, is one of many who have come out criticizing the media's coverage of the protest. LA Times journalist Lorraine Ali wrote this week, the media are, quote, hyper-focused on how we protest atrocities rather than the atrocities themselves. What did you make of this? I couldn't predict where Whoopi Goldberg was going to come down on this particular issue. I do wonder, earlier in that segment, Cindy Hostin, we're going to play a little bit of that, but Cindy Hostin had been talking about the history of student protests, their efficacy in bringing the end to South Africa's racist apartheid system. Nelson Mandela saying that he thought the boycott divestment movement around South African apartheid was crucial to their political success in South Africa. And I do think that, that is an angle that is appealing to someone like Whoopi Goldberg, given what I know of her kind of priors and her politics. But she can sometimes be a little bit like anti-youth in some of her takes. So I don't know that I would have bet on this particular take from her.
Yeah, look, I kind of agree and kind of disagree. So I think my issue with the media coverage of the protest and just media coverage of real-time events in general is that there's a lot of short video clips available to us because of social media that are often characterized in a certain way where it's hard to tell. And this goes to absolutely both and all sides of the conflict, right? You don't know. It's true of people. Somebody grabbed by the police, arrested by the police, you don't know what preceded that arrest. On the other hand, you don't know, if the protesters, it could look like they're doing something wrong, but maybe they were provoked by counter-protesters first. It's a very confusing situation. The facts on the ground are complicated. National media doesn't have a lot of specific knowledge and can just characterize short video clips the way that fits their agenda or just in ways that are lazy and can actively misinform people. And that is probably where I have concerns about what the media is doing. I don't think, over-focusing on the protests is kind of the thrust of her criticism, and a criticism I've heard you and others make as well. And in that, I don't know, we're covering it wall to wall too, because it interests viewers and readers and audiences want information on what's going on in the protest. I don't really think that's the media's fault.
Well, there's protesting it, there's covering it, and there's not covering it. Every time that I mention it, I try to get in that the reason that the protesters are there is because their universities are investing millions of dollars in Israeli weapons manufacturing and defense funds that are being used to commit what the ICJ has been described as a plausible genocide. You've heard me say that routinely multiple times today already. That should be the focus of these protests. And to the credit of the protesters, when they do media, they always redirect the questions and the focus to the horrors that are being inflicted upon the people of Palestine. But to your other point about whether or not there is an inherently built-in flaw to coverage that's happening in the moment and based on video evidence, I think that's partly true, but I think we're also, if we take that position, letting the media off the hook. There has been a dramatic difference between the coverage, for instance, of local student journalism at these colleges and universities and what the corporate media chooses to report on, that I think is better, but it reflects a kind of institutional bias as opposed to just mistakes being made. There has been that reporting from The Intercept that I talked about in my radar from last week, in which their guidance at the New York Times is to avoid using words like Palestine or occupation, despite those being legally accurate words that are used by humanitarian groups when talking about Israel, and the fact that words like massacre are used 60 times more when talking about what happens to Israeli victims than what happens to Palestinian victims, even as the Palestinian death toll is exponentially now more than the number of people who were killed on October 7. So if you look, people have been doing these side by sides, the The student journalist at the Daily Bruin wrote a headline, "Counter-protesters is at UCLA. Counter-protesters supporting Israel are violent, trying to enter the encampment and have taken down protective barricades." The New York Times' version of that is, UCLA calls in police as clashes escalate at campuses. Clashes, as though it's indiscriminate, everybody's violent, no directionality whatsoever there. When people on the ground, and we're going to talk to someone who's on the ground there a little bit later today, so stick around, has been really clear. So yes, people can make mistakes based on video, but also we shouldn't wave away the clear ideological thrust of various institutions as they become
clashes because the pro-Palestinian protesters occupied areas of campus and prevented Jewish students or pro-Israel students from entering the library and other areas of campus.
That's
so
not what
then
happened
they
last
became
night.
violent in response. I mean,
Wait,
so
so
then there was violence on the part of the, so that's why it's
you
described
think
as
it's
a
an
clash.
appropriate violence. You think it's both sides for people to be peacefully sitting down and not doing violence, not attacking anybody, not hurting anybody.
When I
and for an
put up my
outside
hands on you, if you try to enter this
That's not what
thoroughfare on the
happened
campus,
last
that
night.
is violence. That is absolutely what
That
happened.
is literally not what happened last night.
I don't know that it didn't happen last. It was happening in the last
Right.
48 hours.
And I know that you really want to talk about that, and we can if you want to do a whole separate segment on it. But what we're talking about is the violence last night that got people hurt,
So you asked
physically
me if that was
hurt.
you asked me if that was justified. My answer is no, of course not.
Okay.
Nor is the blocking people. But you think the blocking people from entering the campus?
I think that's not violence. So we're having a different conversation. I'm talking about people who were physically attacked.
It is
not
violence because they
safetyism.
try to enter and the people push them back.
If you think that's violence, I think that we have a little bit of a snowflake situation because we're talking about
No, that is
people
literally
who had,
the definition of battery. But
we had at UCLA last night, people were assaulted, fireworks were shot repeatedly into a crowd, mace was sprayed
anyone
at
who
students.
shot a firework
Wait a minute.
at someone should be expelled.
These pro-Israel protesters yelled, "F-U-C-K
There.
Palestine, effing whore, you effing slut." They said, "I hope I rape you," spat on students, used the N-word towards students. That was caught on camera. And in response to that, the New York Times wrote that up as clashes escalate at UCLA campuses.
That seems a perfectly fair descriptor of what happened, but anyone engaged in violence against others should be brought to justice. And I don't have both these group of protesters were clearly engaging in bad behavior and use. I mean, the irony of it is that you're gonna, like, I see the pro-Palestinian side at UCLA being like, where are the cops? Where are the authorities? Where are the people to deal with this? And like, isn't that totally contrary? Then when the cops actually showed up at Columbia, they're like, oh no, not cops, don't do that. Doesn't make any sense to me.
I think there's a difference between saying cops should be brought in to stop violence from happening against another human body versus cops should be brought in to move a peaceful
the Columbia
protest.
students did,
So that's the difference.
They took a janitor hostage. You have a very selective and funny definition of what violence is.
I do.
That is not matched to.
Let me explain to you what I think it is. I think it's when you physically attack another person. I think that's violence, and I think that having a peaceful encampment is not violence. I don't know. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's
but
just
getting
not
back to
an
this
accurate
segment,
description of-
let's watch a little bit more of this coverage, really demonstrating how this is breaking through to the mainstream. To have this kind of a discourse on the View, and in the comment section underneath this clip, I got to say, everyone was talking about this section of the video and applauding Sunny Hostin's take here. Let's take a listen.
I think these are anti-war protests, and I think it's very distressing that we are framing these as pro-Palestinian protests or pro-Israeli protests. These are anti-war protests.
All right, now what do you make of that? It does seem to me to be a real shift in how we talk about this issue.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like the way you described this issue and the way I know many progressives feel about it. So we've been discussing it all day, and we'll be continuing to do so tomorrow, I presume. I think there are very few programs in the media, television programs, where you actually have someone who feels as you do and have someone who feels as I do, or at least cites and calls on people who feel even more strongly about it from the pro-Israel side to be in dialogue about it. And it's very difficult to do and reflects the diversity of opinion about it. But we will keep at it, and we will be back with more Rising tomorrow for another edition of our show.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. For those of you who like to listen while you're on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
See you tomorrow.
Take care.